Outlast An Oak by Jake Spann. Chapter 1. Quote, "That's cheating, son. Your opponent has earned a fair trial." Such a stupid quote rings through my ears as I hold the wheel of my Ford F-150 with my two hands. My son Gideon is in the passenger seat. He means the world to me, and now that he's about to turn 11, it was time for me to make this journey to a place where my father took me around the same point in my life. The point just in front of the hormonal shift that takes a boy from a creature of exploration and happy, blissful play to an aggressive warrior who, even though he is unable to understand why he wants the attention of a woman and wants her with everything his body can muster to the point of severe confusion and rage. My son stands before this window in life now. So it was time I took him to the place special to my family, Oswego, Kansas. I know what you're thinking. Why, of all the places on earth, would you take a boy there to teach him some of the most important lessons of life? The lessons that take him from ages of minimal or little responsibility to the years of maturity, accountability, and dare I say it, manhood. The year was 1999 when my father loaded me into the family vehicle and took me from our sleepy suburban household in the middle of the night without my mother or sisters. It was a different kind of journey. We didn't pack anything or have the usual plethora of creature comforts our normal trips had. Pillows, Game Boys, books, board games, and every snack imaginable. It was just a grown man and his growing son driving. The radio was turned off, but when it was turned to a CD to avoid the change of stations or the static that can often be produced. My father was quite partial to Steely Dan, and so I became fast friends with Peg, Ricky, and some guy named Jack, who for some reason didn't know how to leave the casino. We drove all night through the darkness until the dawn breached the horizon and showed us the glimmer of heaven that remains upon the earth. And as the miles wore on, and I drifted from awake to asleep several times, my father showing zero signs of fatigue, we came to a slowing stop as we pulled into a private property on the outskirts of Oswego, Kansas. Parking the car around 9 a.m. that morning in a strange gravel driveway far from any place that I'd ever been to, we emerged. He with a purpose in his step as the cloud of rock dust settled all around us. I was fearful and weary. The property was clean and neat, but it was sort of different from our cul-de-sac. The sound of chickens, the sight of dogs running about without leashes or any concern. This was so foreign to me. The air smelled different, clean. I remember that like it was this morning's bacon. Out, an old man walked with a shotgun in his hand. "Are you lost?" he said with a tone that makes it feel less a question and more a prophecy of fate. "John Michael, sit your drunk ass down before you blow a hole in your roof." My father calls, without any true care in the world, as to the man's behavior. The old man squinted and lowered his shotgun to the ground. He then put his hand to his forehead to see if he could tell more about his unplanned guests. "Randall Durant, is that you, young man?" the older man called out to his father. It was one of the first times I heard my father called by his full name. Usually we knew him as Mr. Durant, or Sir, or Father, but to hear his full name felt so odd to me. But somehow hearing his name made me feel safe. My father indicated that it was, in fact, him that had come to the property. I was still confused as to the purpose of our visit to this remote and strange place. "Here to show your boy as your father Clyde showed you, I suppose. Well, she's still around back, where you saw her in 1974. I was thrown off by the memory of such a random year by this man. Why does he have such a steel recollection of an event that simply happened here from before I was even a glint in the eye of my father. Before I could ponder, my father began moving around the side of the house. It wasn't anything special, a simple ranch-style home that had a barn off from the road of a modest size. Nothing meant for heavy machinery or livestock, but for rudimentary storage. The house had a fresh coat of light blue and white trim, but it did not hide the age of the structure. The years had done their dance, and while the home had been built upon a solid foundation, one not like the sands of some coastal house or the cliffs of a Hollywood mansion, yet certain settling showed its head, even to the untrained eye of a boy. I walk lightly, even though my father guides me through the tall and unkempt grass into the treaded pathway behind the home. As we fully cleared the side of the main house, in the distance another 50 paces, that was when I saw her for the first time. She stood nearly 80 feet tall, and was so wide across that my father, with his arms, that felt at that time as the length of the world, could not wrap around its base, with even 3 of him perhaps. The bur oak tree of this property. There she was, large and beautiful, with her leaves green and healthy. Around the base of the tree there was a small circle of large white stones, placed and not mortared into their location. There they sat, guarding and hallowing the base of the tree. Son, this is our family tree, the Durant family tree. The statement confused me. In school we had spoken of family trees in the past. We spent a week asking our family to explain our lineage and draw out the map of the past, showing the branching and spread of the past, and how from the people before we came into being. Though here my father was telling me the project we completed in school was nothing more than a piece of paper, as now we stood beside this massive, beautiful piece of creation, and my father assured me that this tree was a relic, a part of the Durant family history. I sat in awe. I wanted to know more. There must be more to this tree. My father walked up to the old growth and said his hellos, as if to an old friend he had long since forgotten, and yet never forgotten. Good to see you again. I've returned, this time with my son, whom I pray one day he will return with his son in kind. He pats the bark of the tree and places his hand upon it with a reverence and tenderness that I have only seen him give 2 other objects, my mother and the Bible. Son, I believe it's time you understand why I brought you here. My father pointed to a point that was nearly 5 feet off the ground. There was a hammer. Not a simple roofing or framing hammer of maybe 20 ounces, but a sledgehammer that would have weighed somewhere around 10 pounds. This was our estimation, as the hammer was enveloped by the tree, swallowed by the growth and healing of the tree, but still now one with the tree. The handle stuck far out, and the metal head was still visible, but barely, as the tree healed around the hammer. I was bewildered at how this happened and when. My father went up to the hammer and slid his hands down the stem of the handle. He touched it and examined it carefully. He beckoned me to come close and then put me on his shoulders for the first time in several years, and the final time of his life, to see up close what his eyes saw. Names. Names and years were along the handle. Randall, 1974. Clyde, 1950. Darian, 1937. And the name of the final name, which was carved in the same handwriting as the name Darian, Martin, 1918. Son, these are the names of your ancestors in these lands. The legacy of our line of Durant is here. With this oak tree, I reached out and touched the handle. This, to any onlooker, would just be the sight of a boy touching a piece of wood stuck in a tree. But I felt powerful. I felt as though with my hands reaching the wood that I was becoming something greater than myself. Like I was being called into the next phase of life. I had no clue as to why. But I knew something special happened and my eyes welled up with watery tears. Not of fear or pain, but of pride. Even though I was young, I knew something powerful was happening under the shade of this oak tree on a random morning. My father sat me down on the ground and proceeded to explain the story of my family and this very oak tree. That story, that legacy is why, in this car right now, making a very similar trip with my son Gideon, he groans as he wonders why he wasn't allowed to bring his cell phone or his Nintendo Switch, why we only listened to music saved on a flash drive, and why he was becoming oddly familiar with the band Savage Garden. But he'll understand soon. I'm sure of it. For me, this is my chance, my opportunity to impart the truth and the wisdom and the mystery and experience that my father gave to me that transcended all the years of my life. So as we continue, I rehearse in my head what my father told me. Perhaps I can get by with far fewer 4- and 6-letter F words. Chapter 2. Dark That Follows. Trees. I wonder how much hatred and frustration they have for mankind. As we speak, there are many trees throughout the world, and especially in California, that are contemporaries in years of the Great Pyramids of Giza. Perhaps the trees are the real wonder of the world, as storms and fires, seasons, and even mankind. These resilient giants have outlasted them all. Empires rise and fall, and yet they grow quietly, their roots deep and long to engulf the earth with their body. Trees have one of the strangest relationships with mankind. They predate us. Even in the Christian worldview of my father, they were created a few days before we were. In fact, there was a time when man, animal, and tree lived in harmony. God put his man Adam in the garden to tend and watch over all that was before him, meaning that the youngest of creation was made master of all. Such a crazy thought. How the God of the Bible would do that, and humble all of creation as such. Perhaps this is a part of why the irony of the fall of Genesis occurred. Yes, it was the serpent that plied the trade of its tongue. Yes, it was woman who grabbed the fruit that was pleasing to her eyes and looked good for food. But it was the tree that produced the fruit. And when the first bite was taken, mankind was banished. But God was not merely only giving punishment to the creatures made in his image. He punished the animals to be in fear of his creation, to be subjugated, enslaved, and eaten by man, for it was from the serpent that the twisted words of the Holy One led to the woman into action. And to the trees he would give a fate perhaps far worse, a punishment of being harvested and burned for all manner of use, to be cut and hewn, sawn in multiple pieces, and their bodies man takes refuge forevermore. Even though they are some of the oldest of creation, they are cursed to sit and simply wait until man claims their body and life for their purposes. You may not remember that latter portion in the Bible narrative, but think back to all the stories and all the things around you, the fires, the buildings, the ornate carving and tables. Trees have always been punished to be our subject for being the host of our downfall. All creation groans for the return of Christ, is what the Bible says. And why wouldn't the trees, while being massive and mighty, live in service to us? However, not all of mankind seeks to destroy and subjugate the earth in desolation. Some of us have come to appreciate the things that grow and marvel and enjoy them. trees especially. Many people plant groves and orchards just to have the fruit of the trees years later, and others plant a tree today for shade tomorrow, yet this odd relationship continues, that of man and tree. It was a relationship of love and hate, joy and pain. That is the story of our family line. Legend has it with the Durant tree that it was not planted by human hands, nor dropped by the mouth of from a bird as the usual method of seed delivery is in nature. No squirrel touched its acorn, and no mouse rolled it along the ground. This tree had a different influence and start. A large deer, with antlers great and massive in size in the days of the native hunters, found itself caught in the branches of its mother tree all the way in the lands of Missouri, before the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The deer struggled and was scared as the rustling of the tree branch gave an easy alert to the hunters of the tribe of the land. The hunters hollered the commands to each, and the deer panicked. Normally in these situations, a deer would somehow break the antlers from its head and then make for the brush in an attempt to get away. Yet this deer had antlers stronger than the jawbone used by Samson among the Philistines. They did not break, and the tribesmen moved in slowly, hoping to keep the deer calmer as it squirmed for freedom. With each step, though, the deer's heart beat faster and louder as he rotated and jumped, doing all he could to free himself. The hunters were licking their lips at their good fortune, and had already counted their blessings. Snap! The branch holding the deer hostage breaks, and the deer, realizing his freedom, takes off quickly. Frantic roars and hollers fill the air as the easy meal for the tribe becomes a challenge once again. They command arrows and spears to be fired upon the deer. He dodges, by luck, the bolts and throws. He sprints with full haste to the west. The deer had zero desire to become a meal and wished to live and continue its glorious life in the forest. Though, a final brave drew his bowstring back and loosed an arrow true. He struck the deer in his side. The shot threw the deer out of step for a moment as he was dazed from the impact. The shot was a foreign feeling and something he had never felt in his life. It stung. The braves all cheered as they saw the change in the deer's movements and knew a dinner bell was about to be rung. They said their blessings and thanked the heavens for the food they were about to receive. Yet as they approached the deer, who stood nearly frozen and limping after the shot to his side, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob took pity on the creature and breathed the second wind into the animal. The deer darted off into the distance once more to the west, and this time no barrage of arrows or spears or traps would fell the animal. The braves, eventually believing they would be able to outlast the animal's remaining life, followed the beast in pursuit. They traveled for an entire day straight, chasing the animal at full pace through the trees and hills and woods. They traveled nearly 80 miles before they noticed the trail growing faint and the signs of blood stopping. The deer had beaten the pursuit, yet the fear of the encounter kept the deer going with all effort, even though he could not sweat to cool himself down. He continued on his flight, when if only he had looked back, he would have noticed that the hunters had given up, and the arrow that pierced his side had been forced out by the twitching of his muscles and the colliding upon other tree branches on the journey. The deer ran and ran until he could no longer run his great race. He then collapsed, exhausted and unable to cool down. He died at this little place that would one day become the town of Oswego, Kansas, several hundred years before the modern settlement activity on these lands by non-tribal peoples. Before the arrival of Martin Durant, the deer's journey was not moot, as God made sure that deer carried upon its antlers a single branch of the oak tree upon his head, all the way to the place of its death. And on this single branch there remained one stubborn acorn that refused to fall from its branch. And so it traveled all those miles from Missouri to the final place of the deer's life. I didn't believe my father when he told me this story to start off our lesson that day in 1999. It was as if he was trying to make a myth of the mundane. I questioned as to how he could know the travels of the deer. I demanded proof that any of the story was real. He laughed and told me that faith is what makes things real. Son, in this world there are many things that will happen that aren't always easiest to explain. Things that don't make sense and things that strike fear into our hearts. Sometimes we'll feel pressure, or doubt in God, in ourselves, in our community, in anything. And in these moments, that's when we must have faith. I didn't quite understand what he meant then. My young self was yet to pay bills, to meet the woman of my dreams, to win her heart, to have a son, to pray with real passion and fear fighting for control of my soul in the moment. I didn't understand. My father saw this. He smiled at me, and a tear filled his eye. He looked back. Looking back, looking back, perhaps this is the feeling that Jesus had when Thomas doubted, and he offered the apostle a chance to put his fingers into the holes in his hands. My father looked at the white stones. They were larger than I first noticed, and heavy. He looked over the tree, carefully, and from the base of the handle he counted 3 stones from the right. My father, a man I thought was the Titan Atlas at this point in my life, struggled and groaned as he rotated that stone, the stone that proved too heavy to lift. He finally released it from its placement after several moments of struggle. He grabbed his back and winced from the aches such a task created for his untrained body in the realm of heavy lifting. Sweat was beating down his face just from the moment of exertion. I was stunned. This was the first time my father had not looked like Superman to me. Was he mortal? No, he couldn't be. This was Heracles in the flesh. Yet the boulder humbled him as he smiled while huffing and gathering his breath. Son, he says, see your proof. I am confused as I stand up and walk to the spot from which he moved one of the massive white stones. He never looked down to check, he simply knew what he would find. The antlers of a deer, and the roots growing through the skull. I am without words at this visual. The story was true. I reach to touch the skull and feel the antlers. They are worn and yet not weathered. They are firm, as if protected by the tree and the rocks. I turn to my dad and jump up and down in amazement. The lesson of faith in the moment goes over my head, but the sight of the deer makes me a believer of me. Makes a believer of me. So, my son, sit down and let me continue this story. Where before I was simply a boy amazed and amused by the words of my father, now I am an enthralled young man, hanging on his every word that he tells me. I am ravenous to know more. He moves the stone back into his place. It takes him less effort this time to reposition the boulder. All right, where did I leave off in our story? Chapter 3, Possession. Martin Durant was born into nothing special. He was nothing special. His life was that of most men in the land of Kansas around the days of the gunslinger and the Western expansion. The family had long since forgotten the origin of the Durant family when they came to America, and to what port. Were they on the side of the Union or the Confederacy? These things were unknown. Yet Martin was born in the tiny settlement to older parents who were nearing the latter years of their lives during the days when the men of America were blessed to see even 50 years upon the earth. His youth was simple. He collected frogs and fought imaginary battles in the woods with sticks, fished with other boys in the area, made fun of girls they saw, and took nothing seriously in church. He was raised Presbyterian. They believed in the election of man and the perseverance of saints. The most important thing the boy Martin remembered from his early church years was that God was sovereign and in control of all things. These lessons had little impact on his life until he reached the age of 14. His father had died, and his mother was weak from years of sickness. He was forced to leave what schooling was available and provide for his mother in her waning years. He had a few other siblings, but they had either been sent off to be adopted by others due to their age or had died from ailments the family could not afford to fight. Martin did not resent these truths. He knew life was difficult, but that God was sovereign through it all. He believed death for his father and his siblings was a freedom and a grace from the Heavenly Father due to their suffering in their days of life. The trade he took up was that of his father, a local farrier. The pay was not glorious, but it was honest, and it did lead the man to grow in strength and knowledge of animals. He did right by all in the town, and the people made sure to give him work when able, even for odd jobs that were not in his immediate profession. And as such by his actions, he became well trusted by most of the town. He tithed, despite needing every penny for the care of his mother. He never missed church as he grew in his years. And for 4 years his mother lingered, coughing blood and diminishing further with the day, withering from the woman he knew as a child to a husk of a corpse, despite everything that he did. And he did much. Prayer, fasting, fair labor. He was looked down upon by no man in the town, even those of means. Then she succumbed to the illness, and Martin was alone in the world with only his workshop near a local farm and his work to keep him company. He was now a man of 18, and at a point when most in our world today would be just discovering and debating the opportunities before him of either work or additional schooling. Though this man was cut from a different cloth. He had a profession, and though he had a general lack of knowledge, he had a fear of the Lord his God, which according to the book of Proverbs was the beginning of all wisdom. He saw that as enough, until he met Celeste Williams. Call it a chance meeting, call it kismet, call it fate, call it divine providence. What Martin knew was that when he saw her, God smiled upon his soul in a way that was new to him, and he had to know this woman. She wandered across his shop one day. He was hammering away in the heat forge and anvil shaping and molding a new batch of pliable shoes for the horses and beasts of burden of the city and local farms. Lord knows what she saw in him. She was the second daughter of the Reverend Williams of the church, who had just moved to town a few weeks prior. She was lovely, but not with a face for lust or eyes that opened the keys to Song of Solomon. She was simple. She simply was. She read, she enjoyed the outdoors, and loved the horses of the farm nearest Martin's shop. And in a world that seemed to be getting more and more in a hurry, with widespread electricity and cars, which diminished certain values of Martin's trade, she seemed to move at a different pace from the other people. Martin took notice of her and dared not speak to her, or even make a friendly gesture, such as a wave of the hand. Yet desire was growing in his heart, and his labor felt different. He felt like once more he had reason to move, to act, and to grow. He felt reason in his life. He began cleaning himself before going to church. He began combing his hair. He wanted to be more than a person he was. In church, the young man paid too much attention to Celeste. So much so that his gaze caught the attention of her father, the good reverend, even from the pulpit. Martin. He pulled him aside by the sleeve after service one afternoon as he was leaving. I see the way that you're looking at my daughter Celeste. He looked at him sternly, and yet with calm intention in his eyes, as he knew from the people of the town the character of the young man. And while he was no scholar or man of wealth, he was held in the highest regard by all the town. Please, come by my house for supper tonight. Martin thought himself in trouble. He had never before, with the old minister, in his life been invited over and assumed he had done something awful in being noticed by the reverend. Martin was nervous and ran to the house of his best customer, the rancher on the other side of town, Thomas Giles. Mr. Giles, the reverend asked me to supper tonight. I think he knows I fancy his daughter. Mr. Giles smiled, as he knew the young man had no training for these moments, with no siblings around or parents healthy during these formative years. He welcomed the young man to his own home and groomed him for polite conversation and company. He gave the young man a crash course in civilized dining and how to behave at the table. But he also dressed the young man in his best clothing. Mr. Giles, I can't wear this. This is too nice for me. You know, son, we say the same thing to our Savior when we recognize the ugliness of our sins. He still throws his covering over us. He removes the dirty rags we wear in shame and clothes us in righteousness tailored to his own body. So please, let me do you this service, young man. Martin hugged the rancher as he made his way back to the town and the church. Mr. Giles was not about to let this clean attire be ruined from the travel. He drove the young farrier over there himself in his Ford Model T. When he reached the parsonage, the reverend and his family were waiting outside. Father, mother, one brother, and two sisters stood beside young Celeste. They greeted Mr. Giles, who also frequented the church before he departed, leaving young Martin with the family. That evening was a tense one, of serious conversation and thoughts toward his attentions. The reverend sought to understand this man that was before him. He wanted to test if the rumors of his character and personality were true. The evening seemed a war for Martin as he battled his natural inclinations at the table and fought to keep his composure at the barrage of questions, both spiritual and in nature and secular. Martin was a simple man, and not one who spent this much time in deep thought, so there were times where he struggled to piece together enough words to provide a satisfying answer, or at least one he thought was satisfying. He thought he was blowing the whole interview, until he looked over at Celeste. Her cheeks were flush, her gaze was light. She was enjoying this encounter, and though they had not had a chance to speak one-to-one yet, he felt somehow as though the fears of the day were nothing. Her stare alone answered the question. My daughter is not some sporting girl from a saloon out west. Mr. Durant, what are your intentions for knowing my daughter? Good Reverend, sir, I am not sure what I'm to say here, but I would very much like to marry her, if she'd like to be my wife. These were the days of short or no dating at all, as life was a vapor here today and gone tomorrow, and the young man who was all alone in the world at 18, with nothing of true value to his name, knew this best of everyone at the table. He knew that there was no reason to wait to build and find and figure things out. He knew she was it. It wasn't because she had some form that drove men wild or anything that bred lust in their eyes. It was just a calling that he believed the Lord had put upon his heart for her. The Reverend Williams looked at his daughter with a tear in his eye. He removed his glasses and sipped on his cup of post-dinner coffee that had been served. He set the cup down and then looked at his daughter. Her eyes and smile gave a reply without the need of words. Son, I am a minister. My daughter is a minister's daughter. We do not have a grand bank account or a backlog of wealth stashed away. I cannot offer you a dowry, as would have been the custom in the past. He sighed with a warm heart as they looked at the young man again. Yet please, Martin, ask me this time if your wish is genuine. Martin tensed up and found the entirety of his lower body shaking. This was his moment, and he had not even noticed until just now. He was not in trouble. He was at the gates of heaven. Sir, please, would you let me? He pauses for a moment and looks at Celeste. He wanted to see her face as he finishes the request. Marry your daughter Celeste. Absolutely, my son. All in the home cheered and celebrated, and the rest of the night was spent with the family, and most importantly, Celeste being given a chance to speak plainly with young Martin. They stayed in conversation all through the night until breakfast the next day. Martin was tired, but joy filled his soul in a way that made the trials of life feel like a light breeze of cool wind on a summer day. He was weightless as he ran from the parsonage to the front door of Mr. Giles, whom he shared the good news with. Mr. Giles was equally elated for the young man, so much so in fact that he loaded the boy up and drove him throughout the town to tell everyone that he knew. And there were many stops. The bakery, the grocer, the bank, the other farms, everywhere. The word had to be spread that Martin Durant was engaged. The wedding followed soon after, in the very church Reverend Williams preached. The ceremony was simple, but it was grand in gravity. Mr. and Mrs. Durant left that very building for the first time and were overjoyed to learn and know each other more. Martin was strong, and while amused and happy with the offer from Mr. Giles to borrow his car, which was still a rarity in the town, he carried his bride the whole way back to his home. He knew, though, his strength was not endless, and he eventually tripped and fell with Celeste in his arms on the roots of a tree from the shortcut he took trying to race home quickly. They stumbled and fumbled under the coverings of this tree that stood tall, and they laughed while he collected his strength. There they became one, knowing each other for the first time in the celebration of their marriage. They were pure in the eyes of the Lord, in the realms of lust and desire. Their feelings for each other are genuine and not born of a feral base pleasure, but of a tug from the soul, placed there by the Creator to love the other. They stayed under that tree for 2 full days as the earth spun, and they just lay there as husband and wife. The stars gave them company in the evening, and the sun shielded them by the cover of the tree, celebrating their union in that day. I was confused when my father first explained this to me. I had never heard of sex and seen a few suggested scenes in movies, but didn't quite understand everything. I asked questions, which my father answered as honestly as he could. Yet when he saw I was still puzzled by the explanation, he simply paused and said, "It's okay. You'll understand these things when you're ready, just as Martin, our ancestor, did." I sat there and thought more of what he told me. I asked him, "Why tell me all of this?" "Son, life is different for all of us, but when you meet the woman God lays in your heart, assuming you're walking the path of an upright man, then don't fear to be forward. Don't seek to date her for 10 years playing house with her, wasting both of your precious time. Trust yourself and ask to marry her. She might say yes." These things didn't seem important at age 11. So the young man I was thought about these things for a long moment, trying to think things through. "Wait, Dad. Sir." He smiled. My father knew what I was going to ask. Was this the very tree? He looked at the handle of the hammer counted 3 boulders to the left this time. He reached down and turned it over. The task had him equally spent as the first one, yet his smile and joy sustained his efforts. I just stayed back enough to give the Titan space to roll it over safely. And as he stepped back, I raced forward, unlike previously. I was eager to see what I already knew was there. Carved there, in this beautiful white rock, Martin and Celeste Durant, May 15th, 1914. I was amazed and lay my fingers along the carving as I saw my family history coming to life. The names of my ancestors, the legend of the deer, and now the place of my ancestors' consummation of marriage before the eyes of heaven. I looked up upon this oak differently, and with more love than it had previously held. Son, there's more to this part of the story. I begged him to continue, so as he replaced the boulder back to its spot. Eventually, the newly wedded couple made it back to the shop, which also served as the family home, yet with a note from Mr. Giles was left for the young man. He went and found the rancher with his family out on the job near the main house. Mr. Giles and his children and wife all came and embraced the newly married man with happiness in their hearts. And Mr. Giles told this to Martin Durant. I know you are a humble farrier, and you and your family have been most honest in your labor all these years, and I seek to see you thrive and continue to be honest people you have always been in our town. I know the home you reside in is really a worn-down shop. That is no place to raise a family. Pick a place in all of the county, and we shall see to it that it is yours, both for you and your wife, to raise a family and call home. Martin was bewildered and undone by the offer. He asked to go and tell his wife Celeste the news. He raced home, still in the clothing he wore on his wedding day. He ran in and grabbed her tenderly, telling her the joyful news. They knew it wasn't a ticket to Easy Street, but they felt it was a smile from the Creator to bless their union. Martin once more felt loved, now more than ever before. He asked his beloved where they would like to establish a residence. She smiled and asked if they could have the oak tree. Chapter 4. A Cross and a Girl Named Blessed. Mr. Giles' words proved true, and the tree, and the deed to the tree. Mr. Giles' word proved true, and the deed to the land for the tree, and a plot surrounding to give space for a workshop and a house around it were transferred to the name of Martin and Celeste Durant. They moved there immediately, camping under the tree, enjoying the beauty of the nights and the cool of the air as they camped without worry. Martin knew, however, they could not stay outside in the exposed air for too long, and sought to build a home, though he was not a man of much means. The community, however, was aware of this truth and aided the young couple. Mr. Giles used his horses and cattle to haul lumber to their building site. The local supply store wrote off metal that Martin used to shape into nails with the forge he built on site. Neighbors brought food for those who labored, and several young men similar in age to Martin came and volunteered labor. These and other kindnesses of the people around him led the home itself and a barn built over the forge for a workshop being fully erected by the end of November that year, allowing for the young couple to safely enjoy the winter in a comfort that baffled the young man. It was on a level that even during the years his father was alive he had not known. People even donated blankets and old furnishing for the couple to enjoy. Mr. Giles even got a lineman to place electric lines to the house, all in time for the awakening of winter. Martin and Celeste didn't have much, but they had each other. And along that, with their blossoming love, kept them warm in the cold air of the Kansas winters. So much so that Celeste was visibly expecting her firstborn by the end of that first winter. Such was the joy of the couple and the Reverend and his family in seeing and hearing this news of the new arrival coming along. That year, they welcomed a baby girl, the couple named Alicia, Elle for short. They loved her, and the family was happy during this time. Roughly a year and a few months later, Celeste gave birth to Darian Durant, our ancestor. The family did everything in joy. They didn't have much in comparison to the community, but it did not matter, as they were happy. Even the babies. In church, they laughed. In the labor of their days, they smiled. In their conversation with others, they were joyful. Yet the will of the Almighty is a strange function in the eyes of man. While, yes, the great war overseas waged, a different curse had fallen upon the land in the year 1918. History books call it the Spanish flu, yet for those in the middle of this plague, it was hell upon the earth, capturing the souls of those not strong enough to fight back and dragging them to the grave well before their time. Horror and fear filled the air, and the communities that had once thrived and enjoyed open fellowship now sought to distance and keep others away. While the disease affected the urban centers the hardest in overall fatalities, it was the rural communities that perhaps experienced the greatest severity, as the people, with their general distance from the happenings of the sprawling urban centers and factories, did not have the natural build of communal immunities to withstand such new disease strains. Oswego turned dark. No family was immune to the curse. It seemed that what had been a great decade of growth and prosperity felt overnight turned upside down. Mr. Giles and two of Celeste's siblings were among the first infected and the first to succumb to the disease. Martin was strong and did his best to protect himself from the virus. Though the general knowledge of the disease was still small in a community like Oswego, people did what they could to protect their loved ones. Martin was confident his measures of keeping the children home and not having them attend church was the right move to protect them. However, one day he came home and found Elle coughing. He was concerned and alerted the Reverend, the girl's grandfather. They prayed their heart out for the sake of the child, beseeching God for healing and mercy on the little girl. They prayed for weeks to no avail. They separated her from her brother and only let Celeste near the child as she tried to nurse her baby girl to health in any way possible, returning her even to breastfeeding. They sought anything to heal the beleaguered girl. However, all efforts were in vain as the girl passed away after a few weeks of struggling. The pain was more than the family could bear, and while they still had a young Darian and watched over and kept him safe at all costs, they were in a sorrow that would not end. They prayed, but with less fervor. They ate, but were no longer married. They labored, but with misery and pain on their faces. They were worn down by this loss in a way that they were not prepared to handle. This misfortune eventually grabbed hold of Celeste, and her sorrow became a lack of appetite. This became a loss of weight, which made room for illness to catch hold. Martin was broken. He was stuck watching as his wife, the woman whom his love for her had given light into his life beyond the mundane, making each day a fresh river of life in a way that we are only taught in fairy tales and Bible stories. Celeste withered, just like his mother did years earlier. He was confused at the repeated pattern in his life. He was scared, lonely, and forlorn. He felt abandoned to a fate without the light of his life around him. He cried out to God. Martin prayed in a different tone than perhaps he had ever even dared to in the past. He wasn't angry. He wasn't disrespectful, but he was raw and real. He told God plainly how he felt and how scared he was. how he loved Celeste and begged the Eternal One to heal her. However, God in his divine wisdom must have had a better plan, as Celeste, too, passed from the disease. Thus the flu claimed the two women in his life, and Martin Durant, at age 23, was a widow with a young toddler. He laid both of the girls to rest in a spot near and dear to his heart and theirs. The pain was immense, though, and while Martin did not blame or hold a grudge against God, he was hurting in a way he could not understand. He needed to do something to try and heal his soul. After consulting his father-in-law, he decided to go on a pilgrimage of sorts. The man wanted to honor his fallen loves, his wife and his firstborn child. They were already laid to rest, but he needed to do something grand, something that would take effort, something that he couldn't do overnight. That was when he heard from a newspaperman of a railroad cart he had seen coming from Colorado with massive white stones of a beauty unmatched in the world's eyes, on a similar level to diamonds and gold, silver and sapphire. Yet this was a stone, and not a gem that could only be found and afforded in small quantities. Thus he knew, perhaps, based on the descriptions of the stone, and how massively the supply available was for the people to get, that this was something he could do. He scraped together what little money he could find and bought off a recent widower a horse buggy cart. He asked the Giles family if he could borrow a few horses for the trip, and they obliged. He spent the next few days reinforcing the wheels and bracing the cart itself for the heavy weight he would bring home. He had 4 horses in the team to pull his cart, knowing the weight he would return with would be more than 2 could handle with care. And so in the summer of 1920, 8 months after Celeste's death, Martin loaded his young son into the horse cart with a few tools to repair the cart and do light work along the journey to pay for travel, and took off for the mountains of Colorado. The journey to the west was calm. Perhaps it was just getting away from the town of his birth and all the suffering in his life, but the air just felt different as he neared the mountains. The two experienced no hurry in their step, no impatience in their journey. They simply moved, as the day allowed them, and pressed hard for nothing. On the trail, Martin, though still hurting, taught his son language and how to form proper sentences, at least by his own recollection, as he was no scholar. They passed through trading posts. They saw the glory of the Rockies and the grace of the hills around Aspen, finally turning south toward Carbondale, Colorado, and then deep into the forest of ash and birch trees that towered toward the heavens, almost as great as the favorite oak tree back home. They camped along the Crystal River and fished for their breakfast along the river, catching rainbow and brook trout in the cool waters. Martin was happy, and yet still empty. However, even on the journey through this paradise, surrounded by snow-capped mountains and the cool morning air, something still had him feeling empty and lost, a hole that was not healing inside of him. They made their way into a little town called Marble, then proceeded up a narrow, winding cliff. The journey by horse and cart took a whole day to safely complete. His son enjoyed seeing the view as they rose to the top of the cliff alongside steep drops. It was a scary sight, and also a glorious one as well. They climbed into the heavens, to a mountain of pure white. At this cleared plateau, they found the men of the quarry working feverishly, cutting and measuring, lifting and sorting, pulling with the latest technology, and even implementing horses and oxen when needed. The cuts they made would make the pharaohs of Egypt jealous of their precision. Martin had seen beauty in his life. He had seen his wife on their wedding day, her first sighting as he was in the shop covered in iron dust and soot. He saw beauty under the oak tree, but this was beyond understanding. Heavenly Father, I hear your streets are paved with gold, yet I fear gold would not do your glory justice in comparison to this white stone, if any stone under heaven could support your house." Tears rolled down his cheeks. A quarryman could tell this man in his cart was not a local. "Hello there, friend. Are you here for a purchase?" Martin cleared his eyes as he beheld the beauty around him. Yes, I am in need of some stones." He dismounted from the cart, locked the brakes, and tied the horses to the post. He hoisted Darian onto his shoulders as he followed the man. "You know, it's odd to see a man of business such as yourself travel all the way out here to view the product firsthand. Will a stone like this be the size that you are in need of?" The man slapped his hand on a rock cut into a rectangle and larger than both the men put together. "Please, sir, I'm actually looking for something looking to get something more manageable." Martin spoke. He told this man the story of the Spanish flu's impact on his family, the loss of his daughter and wife, and the hurt that had left him in his soul. He told the man how he wished to purchase 11 boulders that were large enough for a man to move, but too large for a man to carry. The quarryman remembered his own struggles with the recent plague. He felt the pain that was emanating from Martin. He wanted to help this man find what solace he could, however he could. The man led the traveler to a discard pile near the entrance to the quarry. The pile was large and full of the same beautiful white stones that filled the entire side of this particular mountain. Some were tiny, and others weighed more than any man could even pull. "Sir, this is a pile that we really can't sell to the builders. Please take what you wish, all that you need for your project." Martin smiled as he shook the worker's hand. He was a stranger to this mountain and those who worked here, and yet they sought to help him in his endeavor to memorialize his family's strife. The worker returned to his duties, and Martin went about looking for the right stones, light enough to be moved by a man, but heavy enough to not be carried. The process took most of the day, but by the time he was loaded up and ready to leave, the cart was heavy laden with 11 boulders, beautiful and heavy. He thanked God for the journey and the hospitality of all whom he encountered, and asked for a special blessing over the man at the quarry. Martin was no holy man, but he believed in the power of the Creator, and perhaps that is enough for heaven to open its floodgates upon a man's life. The cart held up to the work of the return journey. Around them on the roads there were cars, and in some spots the two travelers heard the roar of trains. Yet this did not upset them as they kept their pace. They returned to Oswego near the middle of the fall. Their horses were strong, but happy to return to the restful days. Martin, though, had one more task at hand: the laying of the stones. They were the exact dimensions he wished for, and thus he had to roll each one or put it from the cart in front of his house, or push it from the cart in front of his house around the side into the tree. I smiled and looked back. I remembered the worn and weathered path that felt as though the ground were cut so finely by some kind of labor that nothing dared grow there again. My father confirmed my suspicions with a nod. I had walked the path my ancestor used to bring the very stones I was now staring at. The ones my father, with all his might he possessed, had a hard time moving. I wondered the sweat, the time, the pain that was put in by Martin during this final part of the journey. The feeling made me further appreciate the land and this tree. My father could tell I missed something important from this story, and so he looked at the handle of the hammer again and counted the fourth from the left and the fourth from the right. He went and rolled both stones over. They were just as heavy as the others. And now, with me knowing how they arrived at this location, I felt honored and amazed at both my father and also the effort of my ancestor Martin. Huffing He heaved and pushed and got the first out of the way, and the second in quick succession. He had to sit down and spit up a little bit of water from the trial and the work of the boulders. He then pointed and called for me to come and look. On the left side was a granite stone that read, Celeste Durant, 1894 to 1919. On the right side, there was another granite stone that read, Alicia Durant, 1915 through 1918. Seeing these both, I had to sit down. This was no longer just a tree, no longer a collection of stones that I was sitting near and enjoying the shade underneath. This was sacred ground, the resting place of my ancestral mother. My skin was crawling and my heart racing as with each story this place became more and more alive. My father knew I had seen what needed to be seen. He relaxed for a few more minutes and then replaced these two moved boulders, as he had done so many other times on this day. But there was still a lesson behind this revelation that he needed me to understand. My son, we are not promised tomorrow. We're not promised today. God owes us nothing. I don't understand. That is what I remember saying. Death was a foreign concept to me, something that had yet to cross into my world. At that point, I just assumed I was immortal, and that my dad was just another of these immortals. Sure, other people faded. Sure, others died. But not us. What I mean is death will come for us all on this side of eternity. I will grow old. I will get weak and weary, and one day perhaps even have a hard time simply walking. Your mother, this will happen to her as well. She will weaken and one day die also. My eyes were heavy. I hated hearing these words for the first time as they shattered the incorrect bubbled worldview I had built in my mind. Don't be afraid of death, and don't be angry at death. Trust God always. He came over and grabbed me by the shoulders, making sure I looked him in the eyes. And follow the teachings of his son. As I promise you, I don't know much, but it is the only hope we have to see each other again beyond this life. I had been raised in the church. I had heard these truths, and though I had professed to have believed in Christ, my father had not let me get baptized yet, as he wanted me to wait until he believed I truly understood. I resented him for this as I watched friend after friend take public plunge in the waters and hear the roar of all of it in our church assembly. Yet at that moment, I understood that I still did not understand the reason, the power, the meaning of faith. Maybe I still don't. I know I professed later beyond that day and found my father's approval that I was ready for baptism. But did I really understand? As I remember this talk, we crossed the Kansas border in the Ford truck. I look over at Gideon and am thankful. And there on the road I prayed, not aloud but in my mind. Thank you, Lord, for my son and for my father and the legacy that I will soon impart unto the next generation of my family. I have prayed many prayers in my life, and there were more words in my heart, ones I dared not share again, as they are reserved for the Almighty alone. Perhaps I feel as I contemplate and continue to remember the lessons of my day in Oswego. This is what true belief and faith feel. I exhaled in thanksgiving while my son sleeps. Chapter 5. The Promise and the Threat. My mind's eye returns vividly to that day in 1999. With all the boulders returned to their place, I wondered which stone he would turn up next. Which one would roll over and reveal some new hidden truth. My father sat me down. He smiled at me as he knew I was enthralled. What started as a boring road trip was now this amazing experience to me. Come on, Dad, I know there is more to this story, isn't there? I'm on the edge of my seat as he enjoys the moment. Sure, I love my dad, This was one of the few moments in his life that I could truly tell that sure, I love my dad, but this was one of the few moments in his life that could truly tell that I was hanging on his every word. Sure, the bedtime stories and silly songs he'd sing to me when I was a toddler and young child were special, but this had me salivating for the next part. Well, since you asked for it, his eyes are heavy, and his smile has never been wider in my life. Martin stayed on the property and raised Darian. Over the course of the next year, he carved all of the stones to hold the correct messages, both the headstones and other ones that hold their messages, such as the one that contains the date of their marriage. Darian was a good boy, and Martin loved him, but even with his boy surviving the plague and growing strong, it wasn't enough to fill the hole left behind by the absence of his beloved Celeste and Alicia. He didn't give over to alcohol or drugs as many a man had done in the days of trouble. Yes, he drank out when socially with friends, but never to any level of excess. He didn't give himself over to easy comfort, nor did he practice poor stewardship of the few assets he had. Martin simply remained a rock for Darian to look upon in his youth. However, Martin, after finishing the carving of the stones, had one final thing he wished to accomplish with the family. A monument, carving a cross above the rocks. Projects have this effect. They can fill a man with purpose, so that even if love is gone from this world, from his world, he's able to hide beneath a work, a task, or some kind of project that takes his time, his energy, and his focus. Martin, being a man of labor, a man who used his hands for his profession, knew this even though it was never explained to him. He knew he must keep his hands busy and his mind occupied. This was the final thing for the moment. But it was something he knew would be worthwhile for his monument to his fallen love. Tree, I love you. You have seen many of the wonderful things in my life. Your roots hold the bodies of my wife and daughter. But I must end you and outlast you. Though I know you are old and have nothing but fond memories with you, I'll give you a fair fight. Martin spoke as he touched the old oak tree. Perhaps the tree was sad with the man. Perhaps the tree felt the pain this longtime friend had been experiencing, yet the tree was now an adversary of Martin in his mission. And he was going to chop it down, and in its place erect a cross made from its wood. Martin looked through his tools available to him to complete his task. He looked around and beheld a large saw. He chose against that, believing the tree didn't deserve such a brutish death. He found a hacksaw, and again figured that an unfair match. He found a wood-cutting axe that he used to fill their lumber stash for the winter, and again believed that too in his favor for this matchup. This is what I'm looking for, he said as he found his heavy sledgehammer. Martin had strong arms because of his trade and the need to be powerful enough to work metal. Yet he was best at small hammers and not good at swinging heavy hammers. He knew attacking the tree with this blunt object would be a fair fight, one he would not do in haste. Tree, one of us is going to live. One of us is going to win this fight. By my honor and my love for Celeste, I will outlast you, in this life or the next. The tree gave no reply. The tree stood there as mighty as it always had in view of this man, tall and majestic with healthy limbs and roots that were perhaps twice as deep as the tree is tall. Bam! Martin hit with every bit of force he could muster. He smiled as he looked over the tree and saw there was no damage sustained by the tree. This was not to be an easy trial, a task that could be readily completed. Martin now knew this, and somehow this fool's errand made him happy in a way he had not felt in a long while. He smiled and laughed with each hit, as it still proved equally useless, as 10 strikes in the bark of the tree had not even shown damage. The tree refused to shake the leaves. The tree refused to shake. The leaves stayed still and had no shock from the hits to the trunk. Martin knew this was his opponent, his challenge. He slammed the tree several more times until, exhausted and dripping with sweat, he lay down under the shade of this very object he was in the process of destroying. His son Darian came home from school and asked what his father was doing. "Son, I'm living the dream." The man with an injured soul smiled in a way that wasn't true joy, but it was a similar joy that happens to any person when they receive a massive endorphin rush to their nervous system, and in the moment for the farrier, it was enough to keep him going. He was done for the day, but not with his goal. He would go out then, day after day, and hit the tree with that hammer, getting that rush and sustaining the feeling of purpose. Sometimes he would daydream about it while fixing horseshoes. Bam! Every day of the week, he felt he had the energy or was in town. He made sure to get a few good swings in on that tree. He did make sure to take the Sabbath off as a chance for the tree to still heal a bit and keep the fight fair, as he didn't want the tree to give him an easy victory. "Fair is fair, tree. I won't cheat and swing at you on Sundays." Darian knew of his father's hobby, and though still a young boy when this game his dad was playing began, he was still confused enough to ask his dad about the futility of his task. "Dad, don't we have an axe in the shed?" "We do. We also have a saw and a hacksaw and other cutting tools in there," Martin replied to Darian one day while they were eating breakfast together. "Then why don't you use one of those if your goal is actually to chop the tree down?" Darian asked. "Son, that's cheating. And that tree has earned a fair fight," he would reply to both his son and anyone in the community who would eventually ask him. Soon enough, the whole town knew about Martin's hobby and would jokingly ask him about it when they would go about town. Even his father-in-law, and now an elderly man, was confused and concerned by the behavior at times, as it just seemed so pointless and unnatural a pursuit. He wondered why Martin could not pick up Bible study or evangelism or perhaps even remarry. He feared the father of his grandchild was wasting part of his life on a mission designed to be never completed. "Please, son, there are better ways to spend your days," he would ask at times of the man. Martin knew partly in his heart the futility of his chore, but it was his, and he knew that the tree was not something that was going to be easily bested by rain disease or some random event. The tree was old and large and strong, and he knew that he could count on this task to remain a challenge all of his days. This continued all the days of Darian's youth. Martin was never an absent father or a crazy man or a sluggard. He provided an honest service for the honest wages. And when the days were done, sometimes he hit the tree once, and sometimes he hit it about 10 times. Never until he started puking in sickness. But never did he skip a day. Even if raining, he would still make a point to hit the tree, if it wasn't a Sunday. I asked my father, "Why hit the tree?" The same question that everyone in Martin's life asked of him. It was something that was just part of his life during these years. Just explaining why he would do this to a tree he claimed to have love for. "My son, Martin may have not known how to say this to other people, but I'll explain it to you the way your grandfather Clyde told me." I perked up waiting for the answer. Purpose. Purpose? I needed to hear more than once. I needed to hear more than just a one-word answer. Purpose is what gives a man in life meaning. Martin had this purpose when Celeste was alive because the women in our lives are ours to protect and provide for, to cherish and to love as Christ loves his bride, the church. Yet, when his girls died, even though Martin had a son, he felt outside of raising and caring for his child. He felt he had no purpose. His job was a simple one. He raised his son as part of the community, but he needed something to challenge him, to make getting up in the morning have meaning beyond just paying the bills. It still didn't make much sense, but the more I pondered it, the more it made sense. I always felt like time passed quicker and was more fun when I had a goal and was working towards some kind of thing that mattered to me, like a science project or playing basketball in the youth league. This was a small taste of what my father meant: purpose. He explained further to me that when a man's hands are idle, his mind wanders and he stirs and is unsettled as he seeks something for him to tackle and accomplish or work toward the completion. It was the very thing for which man was made for: to tend the garden and work the grounds. Wasn't that Adam's original job in the garden? Martin wasn't a smart man. He was a man who had to grow up quickly. He was honest and worked as such. He didn't have the knowledge and the skills or the ability to figure out something else to work towards that was right in front of his eyes. And in front of his eyes, in his years of loneliness, was the oak tree, standing tall and providing a challenge. My father also explained that this is wisdom, even though it will seem foolishness in the eyes of some men. However, to keep occupied and busy will keep a man from boredom. And son, boredom is the baseline from much sin, which will only lead to death and destruction and pain in your life. I didn't fully believe my father's comments on this particular lesson until years later, when sin found root in my life from the very thing my father warned me against lingering inside of: boredom. You were right, Dad, I think to myself. Only 30 more minutes of driving. I see from a sign on the right-hand side of the road: Gideon is still sleeping, though the sun's rays are creeping higher and higher. I decide to let him sleep, as I know soon enough I'll perhaps have his attention the way my father had mine that day. Chapter 6. Beg. Martin had his task, which added flavor to his life. Yet Darian, as he grew older, found himself more frustrated with the actions of his father. He wanted a normal dad. He wanted a mother, so he found new ways to rebel, doing things very differently from his father. Martin asked him and confronted him about these changes: the drinking, the gambling, the running around with friends up to no good, the partying with loose women. Martin loved his son, but he was a man steeped in deep faith, so he didn't understand these impulses and desires that tugged at his rebellious son. Son, please, come to church with your father, he would plead, only to be met with challenges and defiance. Martin had no way to reach his young man of a son. He only knew what he knew, and wasn't too book smart or able to articulate deep truths to his boy. Please God, he prayed, I see the path that Darian is headed on. I know it isn't the one I tread, but I'm terrified for him as I see the choices he is making and the people he is making them with. Please, Heavenly Father, give me just enough wisdom to teach this boy some of the things that I've learned in my simple years. These were the kinds of prayers offered by the religious Martin during the 1930s, while the Depression and the fallout of other policies scoured and ripped the Midwest open, and the Dust Bowl event plagued farms and people alike, causing folks to flee places that had the promise of work and possibility of some kind of life, not just a better life. Martin stayed in Oswego and watched as people and businesses were ravaged by the issues cycling their world. Darian came and went as he saw fit, And then at the age of 16, one night, he went out and never came home. The next day, Martin looked in the boy's room, the room he had built with the labor of his own hands and the sweat of his brow. There was nothing to showcase that the boy would ever return to the humble house. The room was stripped of clothing and bedding. No socks, no underwear, or even Darian's toiletries used for washing. Nothing was left of the boy's belongings. Martin looked about the house and saw no note or anything. He just saw the room, and he looked about the house and saw nothing now but shades of the past. Memories of a faded past where the boy and his father enjoyed the day and chatted about life, where he taught his son about metalwork and horseshoes, where he sat at the fireplace and told him stories of him and his mother. He remembered the times when the boy impressed him with his reading ability and being beyond his own as he read the Bible with the clarity that he never possessed. Martin was broken. That very night he hit the tree so many times that the handle cut his deeply calloused hands and blood poured profusely from his palms. Still he kept swinging. His heart was torn from his chest once more. Finally, with his hands ripped to shreds, he sat out under the stars and did the one thing he learned to do many years ago, to speak to the person he knew understood all of his muddled and confused thoughts. He prayed. He cried. And then he looked at the tree and realized he had made a dent in the trunk. He hugged the tree, seeing the dent, the work of his hand on the mighty tree. It gave him a small taste of solace in the pain of that night. He missed his son. He blamed himself for not being whatever it was the boy wanted. The next day, when the bleeding stopped in his hands, he went over to see Reverend Williams, the boy's grandfather. He was greeted with a warm smile from the old man who had been his father, his friend, and his pastor for over 20 years. However, what started as a warm hello turned sour as the news of the departure of Darian broke the old man worse than it broke Martin. The plague of 1918 took 3 of the pastor's children, one being Martin's wife Celeste, and his final child died of alcohol poisoning during the early days of Prohibition from a bad batch. Darian was his only living grandchild and the only living relative after his wife passed 2 years prior. Both men hurt, but that night Reverend Williams suffered a stroke. It was not fatal, yet it rendered the wise man of God weak and feeble and unable to care for himself. The church at first acted like they were interested in taking care of the longtime pastor and friend, yet as the weeks grew on, they became impatient and sought to have him removed so that they could recruit a new minister and offer him the parsonage that had been the Reverend's home since he moved to Oswego. However, Martin loved his father-in-law and voluntarily moved the decrepit old man into his home, with him near the oak tree that held his daughter and his granddaughter. The old man was unable to speak or feed himself, and so for Martin, it was an intensive labor of love that wore his remaining days and years of moderate strength to the bone. He aged so much in such a short time, caring for his father-in-law. Yet it was to him his duty and his honor to care for this man, the man who trusted him with his daughter so many years ago. During this time, Martin's practice floundered and became stagnant. He had to ration food for them both and leave early in the morning for bread lines and scrounge for extra side work. Yet he refused to let his staying guest under his roof want for anything he needed, even at the cost of himself. But the years were tough, and they were not meant for someone in a condition like the Reverend. And after 3 years of lingering in this world, the old man, Reverend Williams, closed his eyes for the final time underneath a cover of 3 blankets, sitting in a rocking chair next to the fireplace of the home he helped his son-in-law build. When Martin realized that he was dead, the man alone in the house was not surprised, but was joyous and spoke one final time to his father-in-law. Tell Celeste and Alicia that I miss them. He had faith they were together. Even though the town had put the Reverend out to pasture 3 years earlier, they attempted to clear their conscience by making a big hullabaloo about his passing. They gave him a write-up in the paper and a large memorial service in the church that pushed him out in his hour of need 3 years prior. They even wanted to give him a place of honor in their church graveyard, but Martin refused, as he knew he had a better place for his body to rest. After the service, he carried the coffin himself to his car. He then drove it out to the tree that he had been hitting for years, and yet had only dented perhaps 20% of the trunk. He placed the coffin down and dug a hole to the left of the spot where he buried Celeste. The hole was difficult to dig, like the other two, as it was rife with roots of the great tree. The meaning the body would become one with the tree soon enough. As he finished the hole and came up from the hole, he heard a voice in the distance. "Hi, Father." The voice sounded hoarse, almost as if the owner had some kind of issue with his speech. Martin looked up and saw the weathered face of a young man who had visibly lived hard. But it was a face he recognized clearly. He sprinted at the man and hugged him with a force that would make you think he sought to break his chest cavity open. "Darian, is that you? Please tell me this is you," Martin calls as he hugs the young man. The young man delayed for a few seconds and then wrapped his arms around his father and calls him the words in return. Martin is afraid to let go of his boy now returned. When he finally does, he touches the man all over and studies his face, his hair, and his body. He is the same son, yet so changed in 3 years of his absence. Darian notices how in the time that he was gone, his father had become an old man. His face was worn from all the years over a forge. His body, smaller from the years of sharing food with the late Reverend, his hair white. Darian recognized his father through the disguise that lays upon us. "Father, I need you to meet somebody." He pulled from beneath his legs a tiny boy, less than 2 years old. "This is Clyde. He is your grandson." Martin hugged the baby boy and kissed his forehead with a love that he had long since thought he had forgotten. In this moment, he was happy. There was no more sadness in his eyes, the sadness that had weighed him down since Darian ran away. The boy who had returned, tried to explain where the mother was and how she wouldn't be involved going forward. How Darian had lived hard during his years, and how even though he was still a young man, he was ashamed of himself. Martin wasn't bothered by any of that. "My boy has come home, and he's brought me a grandchild. Oh, happy day." His eyes were teared with answered prayers. "I have a job as a teamster now. I drive trucks. It's steady work, but I'll be out on the road a lot. I was wondering if we could live here with you, and you watch over Clyde while I'm on the road." Martin smiled from ear to ear at the request. "Absolutely." My father was crying as he told me this story. He told me that this is one of those stories I will not understand today, but when I'm older and have a son of my own, I will know the feelings that he felt as he told this part of the story. "Son, I need you to understand this today, at the very least. Like Martin loved Darian and was just so happy to see him despite everything that happened, I love you and always will love you. Always." Telling me this reminded me of the parable of the prodigal son, and how the father, when the boy returned, was not just satisfied to have him return, but had to run and meet him at the gate of the estate, eager to know his boy was alive. In spite of everything the boy did, his father still loved him. This was what my father was trying to convey to me. "That day, son, Martin had his first vision. That day, son Martin had the first version of this talk under the tree, as he attempted as best he could to enlighten Darian to the wisdom he had been privy to in his life. Hence the carving, Darian, 1937 on the handle. My eyes are full of tears as the memory resonates now more than it ever has. I can see the turnoff and the road leading to the old house, the house I had not been to in 25 years. I love my son, and I know now what my father meant when he said always. Some things you have to just be a man looking at your boy to understand. Gideon, wake up, little buddy, we're here. Sure, there was a little bit of paved road left before we reached the gravel turnout. But I think I am allowed to get a little excited. My boy yawns as he rotates about in his seat and then rubs the dust from his eyes. Seeing him helpless as he tries to fully wake to the memory. Seeing him helpless as he tries to fully wake, the memory of the second lesson from the story comes back into focus. My father, after his eyes calmed down from the memory of Darian's return, made sure I understood one final thing as he pointed to a granite stone resting just away from the white stones. It was a headstone of the Reverend, our ancestor. I looked back to my father as he began explaining something that he knew I needed to hear. The Reverend was only loved and taken care of as long as he had something to offer. Once he no longer did have anything, did the congregation take care of him? No, I replied with a sad look on my face. My father explained to me that this was the way of the way, whether secular or clergy. There is only one group of people who will care for you when your use to the world is faded, and that is your family. He made sure I heard that. Chapter 7. Cold, but I'm still here. The next years of Martin's life were much better than the previous ones, as joy returned to his life. He had his grandson Clyde in his life, and his boy Darian was out driving and making a respectable wage. The comfort of the family improved drastically as both men earned an income while Martin's line of work was diminishing, with each person no longer using horses or shoeing cattle. He still had an honest job and a profession to help keep him busy, even though he still kept hitting that tree every night. Bam! Sure, his body could only deliver so many shots to the trunk now that he was in his 50s, and Clive was beginning to ask questions. But the whole tradition of his life made Martin smile nonetheless. He told his grandson that one day his father would be the one to explain everything to him. Clyde, like many of the times for other men in his family tree, did not yet understand. Yet he just smiled and enjoyed life with his grandfather, and when all three were together, they would go fishing or grab a soda from in town. It wasn't a glorious life, and Darian still had some demons to fight, but he was maturing as a man. He returned to the faith of his father. He prayed once more to the Holy One of Israel. This made Martin find a new peace as he saw how his grandchild was seeing faith lived out in both his life and the life of the boy's father. Clyde went to school and went to church. Saw how the community treated his grandfather, and by extension how they treated him. He listened to the lessons, both spoken and unspoken, by the men that he grew up around, and never questioned his grandfather any further about him and his love of hitting the oak tree. However, every single time he had a chance to ask his father when he returned from his delivery route trips, the boy questioned Darian. "You're not ready for that story yet, boy." Darian would smile and rub the head of his child. This was the pattern of their life, as Clyde grew into a young man. And even in his early teenage years, this rhythm persisted. the school for Clyde, in which he excelled better than Darian or Martin ever had, work for Darian and Martin, and then church on Sunday. Faith, labor, and fun. With each other and the people of their community. This was how the Durant men lived together. Then in spring of 1950, Martin fell ill. He had been losing weight and muscle mass for several years by now, and his kin had noticed, as well as those in the community, but he kept his spirits high regardless throughout and continued giving the tree what weak little taps with the hammer he could muster in his sick state. His end was perhaps coming. The family didn't have the money for proper medical visits, and Martin asked not to be subject to such treatment, as he hated the idea of dying in a hospital bed. Yet when he collapsed in church the next Sunday, the people in the town had no choice. He was rushed to the nearest hospital and examined by a team of medical professionals. "Doctor, what is wrong with my father?" Darian asked the medical professional coming to advise the family. We believe it is his heart. It is just pumping less and less blood. Not like he's about to have a heart attack, but he is just not getting blood pumped, period. It is like his heart is just quitting on him." The doctor explained to the boy that he was most likely going to pass in the next few days, maybe a few more if they could sustain him here at the hospital. Darian and Clyde were both upset as they went to the room where their patriarch lay quietly on a bed. They were scared, upset even. Martin awoke and was weak in his voice. "Hey guys, where's the party at?" The boys smiled with heavy eyes as they wanted more days and more time with the head of family. "Dad, you need to fight. Maybe we can figure out a way for you to recover." Darian spoke as he held his father's hand. "My son, I'm just fine." Martin smiled in his hospital bed. "My heart died in 1918 with your mother. But I knew I needed to be here on Earth for you. And now, I know that you are a man. I raised a man." He chuckled a few times, as felt the weight of his worn down body fighting against him. "Darian, Clyde, I've been waiting to go to heaven for 32 years now. I just hope your mother can recognize me when I get there." Martin wasn't concerned if his understanding of heaven was flawed. He knew in his heart he had no clue what the other side of eternity was like, whether people actually recognize one another, or if God's glory just outshines all else to the point that nothing else matters. Martin was at peace. Mostly. That night was a stormy one in Kansas, with thundering lightning and nastiness the likes of which only a person of the Great Plains understands. Martin, however, felt a small resurgence in his bones. He felt less tired than he had in weeks, as though some of that strength of his youth was there, just for a moment. "God, are you giving me what I want?" The dying Durant prayed aloud as he placed one foot on the hospital floor. It was cold to the touch, but he knew he could stand. He then placed the other and stood up. He had balance, something that had escaped him in recent weeks. He took a deep breath and knew that he was not going to throw away this moment. He knew his time on Earth was almost up, was almost over, and yet there was one more thing he needed to do. Darian and Clyde were asleep in the chairs of the room, dead to the world, enjoying the noise of the violent storm outside that gave them deep dreams, the kind that are remembered for years later by a man. Martin smiled as he looked upon his son and grandson, knowing this was the last time. He reached carefully into the coat pocket of his son and pulled out the keys to his car. Martin then tiptoed out of the room, turning around one last time to whisper goodbye. He moved as quickly as he could down the hallway before he felt the weakness in his chest. He leaned against a wall to collect himself and realized walking fast was just a bit too tiring. He saw a wheelchair on the other side of the hallway and figured that would be a better choice. He limped in the chair and then began pushing himself very calmly and slowly to work with his tired heart that was nearing his final beat. "Just hold out a bit longer, old man," he asked of his own body. This was his final request, his prayer in action. The staff of the night paid no attention to him as he slowly scurried about the hall down the front entrance. He then looked about for his son's car. It took him a bit of time in the cold rain to find it, but he located it, and braving the winds and the rain, he rolled up to the car and got himself inside. Sitting in the car now, he felt strongly that God was on his side for this final fool's errand. He started the car and put it in gear. He knew exactly the way home, even though the rain was thick. He patiently made it first back to Oswego, and then back to the road that led to his home. The rain still buffeted the car as he reached the front of the house. He kicked the door open and tried to walk out. He closed the door of the vehicle, still dressed only in his hospital gurney. He took his first step toward his ultimate ruin with a smile on his face. He reached the side of the house where the sledgehammer was kept. He pulled to try and lift it, but the weakness in his chest made the task hurt and seize up his chest. Lightning swirled all about, and violent wind as well. A strike nearby made him slip to the ground in the side of the yard. He was wet and cold and covered in mud. His heart was fading and fading quickly, but he was determined. "Jesus, my Lord, please, just one more hit." He had his mission. Martin grabbed the handle and tried to stand, but his legs felt too weak, so he crawled, holding the handle of the sledgehammer tightly. He pulled himself along the same path that years ago he had pushed the marble boulders along. Now it was he who was rolling around to his final place. "Just one more hit," he mouthed with a lower volume than before. He was not going to let this chance pass him up. He reached the base of the trunk after crawling slowly along the ground at a pace that would make a turtle get angry at the lack of speed. He placed his hand along the trunk and dug in his nails as deep as he could into the tree, using the tree to pull himself to his feet. The thunder boomed about the area as the storm continued to rage and rage. He gritted his teeth now as he stood face to face with the tree for the final time. "I'm still here, tree." He roared with everything in his body as he summoned what strength he could and slammed the hammer into the tree with a force that he had not used to hit the tree in several years. His heart stopped. It wasn't beating any further. He felt dizzy, but in his mind he prayed, "One more strike." He found a way amidst the closing of his vision and the staggering of his step to manipulate the hammer above his head once more. He bit down hard as the vision closed with the swing. Thoom! Bang! He struck the tree with the last ounce of energy he had, and when he connected to the tree, and with the connection with the oak tree, lightning struck his body and melded the hammer into the tree. Martin fell to the earth, and the hammer remained in the tree. The storm subsided, and the boys eventually found a ride home from a hospital vehicle, where they knew they would find the old man. As the dawn came, they saw the body of Martin under the oak tree, with his hammer now a permanent fixture of the tree. It was lodged in so well that not even King Arthur would be able to retrieve it. "Why, Dad, why?" Clive was confused. He was hurt at seeing his grandfather had fallen from the world. Darian smiled, as he knew in his heart this was the way his father wanted to exit the world. How he lived after the death of Celeste, fighting that tree. "It was a fair fight, Dad. A fair fight to the end," he said as the medics who drove them back from the hospital rushed to check on Martin's body. The next days were simple for the family, as they held their funeral in the church that Martin called his Sunday home for his whole life. Not a bad word was said of him, and when it was revealed by Darian how the old man passed from this life, all in attendance smiled, as they knew enough about Martin to know that was a happy end for him. Darian and Clyde, after the service, buried their patriarch under the tree, under the first stone that was directly in line with the handle. Afterward, Darian sat his son Clyde down underneath the oak tree, who, despite having a hammer lodged in her side, looked just as healthy as when Darian first saw it. Son, it's time to explain everything about this tree to you, the way my father told me back in 1937. There under the tree, Clyde received his talk, his series of lessons and stories, and to commemorate the occasion, they carved the handle. Martin, 1918. Darian, 1937. And Clyde carved Clyde, 1950. Clyde became a man that day. And while life didn't just start all being sunshine and rainbows for the two men of the clan Durant, they soldiered on as best they could. Clyde did well enough in school to get a chance at college, and so in 1954, Darren sold the house with the exception of the tree and the area around a tree, as stated in the land contract, as that was their family land. The money was given to Clyde for him to go to college, and at the University of Kansas to study engineering. Darren hugged his son when they parted ways for his college, as Darian returned to the trucking field to continue his routes. In 1974, my father came to the hallowed ground for his formal education into the family legacy, and thus that day they carved Randall 1974 onto the handle. And in 1999, when I arrived for my lessons, it was at this time that I got to stand up, fully knowing the history of the tree and its relation to my family, the memories, the magic, the trials. This tree had been here for all of it, and Lord willing, will be here long after we're gone. Martin saw to that by having 4 people buried beneath it, as the tree no doubt added their bodies to the root system as they are one with the tree. My father handed me the knife and I walked up to the trunk, seeing how 49 years of healing from the lightning strike on had healed with the tree growing around the hammer. It was no longer a fluke thing, but a family legacy, a legacy of determination, of fearing the Lord, of taking care of family, of loving fiercely, and being worthy of honor. I carved Taylor, 1999. When I finished, I hugged my father, and we left the way we came. And now I stand parking the truck in the gravel driveway that is just the way I remember it those 25 years ago. Gideon and I exit the vehicle. I am no longer nervous about what I will say. I am ready because my son is ready. Chapter 8. Over. Gideon and I walk the same path I strolled, that my father Randall walked, that his father Clyde walked, that his father Darian walked, all to taste the legacy of Martin Durant. The stories flow easily, as if I can hear my father's voice in every syllable. The boulders prove just as taxing, if not more so, for me to move. All of the evidence for each story is still there. The tears are heavy, and his attention is mine. By the end of the tale, he asks a question that every single person in the family asks before they truly understand. Why didn't he just use an axe or a saw or a chainsaw? Why a hammer? I smile as I hear my dad's voice in my reply. Son, that's cheating, and that tree has earned a fair fight. We leave the way we came, and after a long and emotional day, the handle had a new name carved into it. Gideon, 2024. This has been a reading of Outlast An Oak by Jake Spann. I apologize, there are times where I stutter or lose my place sort of because reading is difficult, and even though I am the author of this, there are times where my own words get jumbled in my head. Not so much because I wrote them bad or anything, but because I just struggle at reading, and I apologize for that. But I wanted this to be an authentic reading of the book. I hope that you enjoyed this. If you do, please let me know. I'd be honored if you could feel comfortable adding it to your Goodreads profile or anything else. This book is published on Amazon, and if you desire a copy and, funds are tight or whatever, I'd be happy to mail one to you. But please let me know. Regardless, I hope that you have a blessed life. And I hope that you make memories with your family. And I hope that you love your God. And I hope that you pray to Him with a passion and a fervor that beats out other things in life. God bless you. Have a great day.